Thanks for joining us. I'm Nancy Furness, and this is We've Got Issues. We're filming today at Poirier Library, and we'd like to thank the library for giving us the opportunity to carry out our interviews here. Before we get started, I'd also like to acknowledge that our interviews are taking place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of Coquitlam First Nation. So we thank the Coquitlam people who continue to live on these lands and to care for the lands and the waters and all that lies above and below. Today, I'm joined by James Bobick, who is a founding member of Wondrous Tree Fellowship. So thanks so much for joining us today, James.
It's nice to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background as far as trees and nature in general?
Sure. I'm a founding member of the Wondrous Tree Fellowship, of course. It's a local advocacy group that we say we like to educate, advocate, and celebrate everything to do with trees and nature. I've been in the horticultural industry, working for various different parks departments in cities for over 30 years. So I'm a red seal horticulturist and a long-time environmentalist. Yeah.
Okay, great. Now we're here in Coquitlam, and we're going to talk a little bit about the urban forest today. Can you tell us what is an urban forest, first of all, for folks who may not be familiar, and why is it so important to somewhere like Coquitlam?
Yeah, so an urban forest, I guess the best definition is really when you think about an urban containment area, your urban areas of a city, all the trees that you will find covering that area. So we're talking about city street trees, park trees, areas of remnant forest that still exist within city limits. We're talking about private residences as well and businesses. So really covering the whole area of where trees grow, including understory like shrubs, some ground covers. Basically, that makes up the urban forest.
Okay, sort of the whole natural component of our environment here, whether right in the urban
That's right.
city.
Pretty much everything green is really considered part of the urban forest. Yeah.
Now, Coquitlam is currently putting forward a draft urban forest management strategy. It's their very first document of this sort. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and why it's important to Coquitlam?
Yeah, it's hugely important. When we look at what's happening with our climate change, our summers getting hotter and drier. We had a heat dome in 2021 that was very severe.
I remember that.
That's right. Yeah, and according to climatologists, we're going to be seeing more of that those sort of weather events. So trees are so important because they do so many great services for us. Of course, as you know, stormwater management, mitigation. They filter out air pollutants, give us oxygen back in return. Of course, and one of the most important things of all that they do, of course, is that they cool our cities. They mitigate that heat island effect, and we're going to really need that more and more. So having a really strong urban tree management strategy going forward is really important for the livability and the resilience for cities and communities.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing that. When we talk about Coquitlam's draft urban forest management strategy, what are some of the strengths that you see in it? What are some of the really good points that they're bringing forward?
Yeah, there are some strong points. One of them, of course, is a very aggressive tree planting program. So, which is really important because we know that we're losing so many trees to development. And of course, some trees are just not able to adapt to the climate change that we're seeing. A lot of our native trees, our hemlocks.
Our western red cedars.
Western red cedars are struggling. And even some of our big leaf maples are starting to struggle a little bit with climate change. So we need to keep planting trees, and it looks like Coquitlam has they've committed to I think anywhere between 5,000 and 7,000 trees per year to be planted.
That's impressive.
Which is impressive if they can do it. If the trees are available and they can get those planted, that's terrific. The other thing is very good about their draft so far is diversity of trees.
Yes.
Yeah, which is an important one because again, with climate change, there's issues around that. Also, issues with has to do with climate change as well is the amount of pests, new pests and diseases.
Emerald ash borer on the horizon.
Emerald ash borer, yeah. We've seen the hemlock looper moth proliferate in Stanley Park, for example. That's a native species, but But yet, with the conditions being right, these mountain pine beetle was another explosion of infestation. So having diversity is really important, so that a pest may come in like an emerald ash borer, but it won't affect your oaks or your maples or different trees, although it may be devastating to the ash trees. So that variety diversity is really important.
Right, so that gives a little bit of resilience to the urban forest with respect to resistance to pest and pathogen problems, as well as other issues as well. So this urban forest management strategy, are there any gaps or anything that you think could be done better?
Yeah, well, I think there definitely are. There's a couple of main points that come to mind where I think it really needs some improvement, and that has to do with tree protections overall. We know that the last time Coquitlam updated their tree bylaws was in 2010, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, so 16 years ago, and a lot can change in 16 years. Pressures have increased for development, and again, we mentioned climate change already. So things are always changing, in our communities. So updating that bylaw is really important, because there's one glaring, obvious area that we're seem to be lacking in, and that is the ability for residences, basically people who own their private properties, the ability for them to cut down two trees per year. And that's without permit and without replacement trees being required. And so that can be a real problem. It's a real loophole, because when you consider that overall the percentage of trees in an average community, in an average city, tend to be anywhere from 50 to 75% of the overall trees growing in a community are on private property. So when you allow 2 to be cut per year, well, if you do the math and you think about that, let's say I wanted to, for whatever reason, I didn't like trees.
Right.
Wanted to get rid of some trees. I could take down 2 trees this year, 2 trees next year, another 2 trees the following year, and I could have my lot cleared within a few short years. Now you multiply that with many other homeowners potentially doing the same thing over 10, 20 years, and that could be a huge amount of canopy loss overall.
Well, it almost sounds like we're looking at the positive side of the equation, but not taking into account the negative side. So it'll be really hard to actually monitor what is going on. Yeah. How do you think that this is a successful balancing between development and green space? Are we succeeding in doing that with this?
Well, there's a problem. Yeah, there's a problem there, because like I say, planting trees is really important. We need to keep doing that as much as we can. But I equate it to be a little bit like trying to fill up a bathtub. You're planting trees. You've got the water on full
with the
full
plug
blast,
out.
but you've got the plug out, right? And that's the part about not retaining our large mature trees. That's a hugely important part of this as well. Protecting those big trees, because they have a big advantage over newly planted trees. They've survived to be older, more mature trees. And when we talk about the importance of mature trees in a community, I like to use the 50-year rule. And that being that at 50 years, our trees are really beginning to maximize their services. All those important services we talked about earlier are really reaching the height of what a tree can give us at 50 years plus. Right. So if we're losing those big trees, that creates a big problem. It also creates a big problem for diversity, species diversity. We know a lot of birds and insect species that are in decline rely on these large mature trees for habitat. So that's the reason that's a big problem.
And for diversity, you talked about species diversity, but also age diversity, right, like you say. So we need both of those. And tree retention in the city, exponentially more services provided by trees as they mature. And you mentioned that 50-year rule, I think you called it.
That's right.
Yeah, so all important things to think about. How does Coquitlam compare with other municipalities? Is Coquitlam ahead of the curve or behind the curve on the basis of this new strategy?
Yeah, so currently, I mean, when you look at it, Coquitlam looks pretty good as far as the canopy cover percentages, and that's usually the general way that we use to measure, how a city or how a community is doing as far as, their forest canopy cover. So 33% sounds pretty good, because you really sort of that average that we're sort of looking for, or people are striving for, is at least 30%.
A minimum of 30%.
Minimum of 30%. So 33% sounds good. But I believe it was just a few short years ago, I believe in 2014, I think it was, where they were at 40%.
Oh, wow.
Citywide. Yeah. So
Okay.
so there's actually been a quite a decline over the last number of years of percentage of canopy, even though 33% sounds really good. The trajectory is sort of on a downward trend as far as, and that's because there's been so much more development. Burke Mountain in the northeast sector of Coquitlam is being developed, so there's been a lot of tree loss overall, and so I think it's a little bit misleading that it may look good on paper, but if we're not protecting those trees, then we're going to continue to lose canopy cover.
Okay, so that raises a couple more questions. Sorry, there's so many questions here. And that is there any way to monitor that canopy change? Is that in the works right now? Like, we know that it's declined since 2014. We assume that it may be declining further, or how would we determine that?
Yeah, and I think that's another area that we really want to see some improvement in with the city of Coquitlam. We know that they're not proposing fixed canopy targets at this point, and we think that's a problem as well, because really, when you can have an aggressive strategy to increase your urban tree population, but unless you have a way to measure that appropriately and have accountability around that, then again, there's a shortcoming there, because it's one thing to strive for greater canopy cover, but how are you going to do that? How do you measure whether you're successful or not?
Now, community input has been part of this process. Do you think the community has had a fair shot at being heard and inputting their thoughts and ideas on this?
Well, initially, a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, I think it was, Coquitlam did put out a survey, and they were looking for feedback from the public, and overwhelmingly, the people who responded to that were very much in favor of protecting our urban forests, having strong protective tree bylaws around protection of those forests. So that was great to see. But I think recently, with this new draft that's just come forward, it seems like there isn't a great opportunity for the public to have input on the findings so far, and a very short period of time to respond as well. So that is concerning.
Okay, so if there was just one key thing that you could say that you would like to change about that urban forest management strategy, one point that you would like to make, what would that be? I
think the biggest point would be overall tree protections. I think that really is a big gap in the strategy at this point, and I think it's really, really important that we see that fixed up. It's important to remember that Coquitlam is the only major city within the Metro Vancouver regional area that allows for 2 trees per year to be cut on residential property. Every other city requires that you have permits, that you get an arborist assessment before you're allowed to cut those trees. Now, nobody's saying that you can't cut trees down that are problem trees,
Absolutely.
disease trees. Yeah, I mean, there are trees that are planted in the wrong area, I mean, way too close to a house. So nobody's saying you can't take those trees down. I mean, we have to look at each tree in an individual.
Pragmatic.
Yeah, be pragmatic and have an assessment done, because it's an educational opportunity as well, to have an arborist come out, look at a tree, see if it really is a problem tree. I mean, a lot of folks are just afraid of trees, so they'd rather see a large tree get removed from
or maybe it's messy.
Yeah, it's messy. Sometimes you get that. People don't like a tree just simply because it drops its leaves in the fall.
And maybe a lot of folks don't realize all the services that tree is providing and how hard it's working to keep our communities healthy and livable.
That's right, yeah. And one thing I'll mention, too, about those tree removals, there was a study done by the city of Vancouver way back when, and this is going back a ways, but in 1996 to 2013, I believe about a 17-year period there, they allowed one tree per year to be cut on private properties and residential properties, so one tree.
How did that turn out?
Well, they found that over that period of time, over 23,000 trees, I believe it was 23,400 trees were removed over that. Wow. Healthy trees were removed over that time. So it just kind of gives you a bit of a snapshot into what can happen if you don't have these strong protective tree bylaws.
Well, I think you've made some really good points about Coquitlam's urban forest management strategy draft, that there's some really good things happening there with lots of emphasis on planting trees and making sure we have tree diversity. But there's also a gap in that we're not protecting what we already have, and those mature trees are so very valuable, and we can't just replace them with a new tree like that.
Right, right. And there's one more thing I just wanted to add to
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
You just made me think of another point.
There's so much we could talk about here.
Yeah, and I do want to give a bit of a hats off or a nod to the city of Port Moody, because they've actually just come out with an updated tree bylaws themselves in their own community, and they've really strengthened their tree bylaws, which is great to see. And one of the things that they're doing as well, that again Coquitlam really could be doing, is having a significant tree or heritage tree registry, and which I think is really
big trees.
So we're talking about those really big iconic trees that are 80 centimeters diameter plus.
Wow, yes.
Yeah, big trees. But they're iconic trees within a community. I mean, the services they provide are invaluable. In fact, a large tree like we talked about, an 80 centimeter diameter, will filter 70 to 80% more of air pollutants from the atmosphere than a tree that is, let's say, 25 centimeters.
So we're talking about that exponential increase in services provided. With
Exactly.
The size of the tree.
Yeah. So again, it would be really great to see the city of Coquitlam adopt similar regulations around heritage trees, to have a registry, have a way of protecting these really iconic trees.
Okay, so some good ideas there and input for improvement. If folks have some feedback or input that they would like to get to the city with respect to this draft urban forest management strategy, how can they do that?
Yeah, I think the best way to do this is really to go directly to emailing mayor and council on this issue. I think we really need to let them know. After all, we elect mayor and council to serve the people, and it's really up to them. I mean, they're in charge of adopting the tree strategy, and whether or not it's going to be a strategy that works for people in the future, that works for generations to come, because these decisions that are being made today do have implications for generations to come. How we use the land, how we develop, are we considering trees as green infrastructure? Are we incorporating that into the development process before developments are approved, so that we're ensured that we have these trees as part of our community.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for that. And I think that comments are being accepted until April 30th. So if folks want to input into this, they need to do that as quickly as possible. Thank you so much for coming in and sharing. And we'll keep our eye on this one and see where it goes from here.
Well, thanks so much for the opportunity. Always love to speak to trees, preach the green gospel, as I like to say. So it's such an important topic. So I do urge the public to really motivate themselves, get out there and let council and mayor know how important our urban forests are.
And just as a matter of transparency, I am also a member of Wondrous Tree Fellowship, so I share that sort of green dream that you're talking about there, so let's make it happen.
Right, yeah, let's make it happen. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, James.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thanks for joining us. This is We've Got Issues, and I've been speaking with James Bobick of Wondrous Tree Fellowship.